What's up, everybody? It's Soren Baker here on Unique Access Entertainment. As always, please hit that subscribe button. It's right down there and it's free. That enables us to keep coming to y'all as often as possible with as many interviews as possible, as many great debaters as possible, as many first and 15th as possible. So please hit that subscribe button, like our content, share it, talk about it, be about it, each one, teach one, and we appreciate your support getting us this far. Speaking of support, today's first and 15th was inspired by a tweet that I got from a longtime watcher and supporter of the show, Akil. He had sent a tweet from one of my videos on the 1st and 15th about the 7 minutes of funk, and he thought that it was interesting, but he also thought it'd be cool if I did an episode where I wove in my personal experience with some of these songs, because these are some big songs, and 7 minutes of funk is such a prominent song and such a storied history. There's the link to the original video that I did on 7 minutes of funk if you want to check that out in tandem with this video. But to the bottom line is, I'd gotten the idea to do that episode because I was looking at an old picture of Dru Down and myself, and I just thought, like, oh man, it's crazy how many people have used that song, 7 minutes of funk. But I also talked a little bit about the differences, but this video is going to do a little more to explain that, because just using Pimp of the Year by Dru Down to kick it off, because that's what kicked off the original idea. I remember that song when it came out, like 94. Man, Pimp of the Year, it was the first song I really heard from the Explicit Game album that Dru Down had. That was on Relativity, of course. It had come out, Fools from the Streets, the year earlier of 93 on C Note Records. But the thing is, I remember Pimp of the Year stood out to me for a few reasons back in 94. One, I had heard this sample before and used largely the same way a few times, several times in fact. But the thing that I thought was interesting about it is the way Ant Banks flipped it, and some of the other samples and sound bites and different effects that he brought into the song, I thought made it sound more inviting than what you would normally hear with a pimp song per se, because pimping, obviously there's nothing nice about that. And he Dru Down's voice being high pitched and how he played with his style, and to give it up, give it up, give it to me, like even that was so inviting and so welcoming. But then talking about pimping to the degree that Dru Down does on the song definitely didn't match per se the brutality of pimping and evil street nature of pimping, but I felt it gave the song a very warm, rich vibe that 7 minutes of funk inherently has, which is why I think it's been sampled and used so many different times over the years, because the song is like phenomenal. But one of the early songs that I knew from back in the day was Dane's Love at First Sight. Now, this song is on Dane with Fame from 1987. So this was, early in me getting into rap, given my age. And I'd only been listening to rap for a couple years at that time, and I didn't by any means have all or even a lot of rap, even in 1987 yet. But the thing about Love at First Sight that was so intriguing is because It's My Thing by EPMD also came out in 1987. And this is pretty remarkable in the sense that Dane's Love at First Sight, and shout out to Dane and the alumni as always, but Dane's Love at First Sight and EPMD's It's My Thing both use 7 minutes of funk. Herbie Lovebug, who produced Dane's Love at First Sight, used it much more in the background sonically, whereas EPMD produced it and they put it much more in the foreground. So that's the driving force of It's My Thing, whereas it's more background of Love at First Sight. Right there, hearing them both for the first time in 1987 was striking, because I didn't even necessarily, until I started really, really delving into EPMD and getting so into them and looking at them as one of rap's greatest groups, I didn't even kind of connect or make a big deal out of the Love at First Sight usage, because Dane, that was definitely a great song and everything, but I looked at his other songs that I more gravitated toward, and the fact that it was much more in the background. So Herbie Lovebug didn't do what EPMD did sonically, and that left a very different mark in my mind, even though I knew it was both there. Now, Love at First Sight is another great story rap. Dane is one of the kings of that. But EPMD's It's My Thing was such a groundbreaking song at the time for 1987. And with Eric and Parrish starting to break through and become, what they ended up being icons in the game too, and one of the best rap groups of all time. That really stood out to me and was such a big thing because like Cinderfella Dane or Nightmares or Delancey Street or This Beat a Death Beat, I preferred all those to Love at First Sight. And maybe it's because I didn't like quote unquote love songs as much per se, as the Woo would say, a young youth. But the reality is both songs were great and both songs showed that 7 Minutes of Funk already for these two uses were being used dramatically different ways, dramatically different song. It's My Thing is much more braggadocio. Love at First Sight is a story rap, and it's of course dealing with romance. And in Dane's instance, it's heartbreak and frustration and dealing with that in a song. So that was that. And those were the first two songs that I really liked. I'll get into some other things in a little bit, but those were the first two prominent things, usage, I should say, of 7 Minutes of Funk. So then as you go a little bit forward, Only When I'm Drunk with the Alkaholiks in 93, produced by E Swift. This song, I just thought was hilarious. They're burping on the song. They're talking about drinking. And I'd, at this point, of course, seen a lot of people drink, seen a lot of people be drunk, seen a lot of people doing a lot of stuff that Alkaholiks were rapping about on that song, and the comedy of it. This was dramatically different from Dane, which was a serious kind of somber type of song. EPMD, It's My Thing, was much more braggadocio, New York straight talk. They're pumping out their chests. Yeah, we're from New York. We're doing it big. It's my thing. Da, 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 da. Whereas Only When I'm Drunk showed these pitfalls of drinking as the humor, if you want to look at it that way. And right there was a whole other wrinkle. And I thought that 7 Minutes of Funk was used brilliantly by E Swift in this instance. So right away, man, it's three songs, three different, dramatically different subject matters, dramatically different themes, dramatically different feels of the songs. Only When I'm Drunk had the fun party vibe that the Alkaholiks were known for, especially early in their career. And it unlike EPMD in particular, where it sounded not as crisp and clear mix and sonically, maybe because of the studio equipment, the Alkaholiks version I thought was very crisp and clean and clear. And that's something that continued the following year with Pimp of the Year with Dru Down and Ann Banks. And right there, again, totally different type of subject matter, totally different vibe, totally different feel, but another great song. And I remember when Pimp of the Year came out, and I would ask people, some people knew or cared about It's My Thing, but most people didn't know about the Dane and didn't know or didn't care about the Alkaholiks using it. So right there, I noticed in 94, rap was already splintering into all these different, like, oh, I like the Alkaholiks, but I don't listen to Dru Down, or oh, I love Dane and EPMD, and I wish the Alkaholiks and Dru Down wouldn't have used the beat too, or it was weird stuff like that that was already starting to happen in that case by the time we get to 94, the mid 1990s. But lots of different things were going on, and then we wait a few years for one of the other big prime examples, Aint No Brother by Jay-Z, featuring Foxy Brown, produced by Big Jazz. Jazz, of course, the Jazz, as known early in his career as Jay-Z's mentor and partner in rhyme, produced that song, and that was, to that point, Jay-Z's biggest hit, Jay-Z's breakout hit, really. And 7 Minutes of Funk is on there again, and this one is much more lyrically aligned with what Dru Down had done back in 94 with Pimp of the Year, but the added wrinkle of having Foxy Brown, a woman, going back and forth with Jay-Z was a prime example of this winning in this formula of the male versus female back and forth dynamic, talking sex stuff, or what we're going to do to each other, or why I'm so bad, or why I'm this, or why I'm that. Kind of like one of my other back and forth examples, one of my all-time favorites of that is Chicken Head, of course, by Project Pat, featuring Lachette and 3 6 Mafia, that came out in end of 2000, beginning of 2001. So that dynamic of Foxy Brown and Jay-Z, the male-female Bonnie and Clyde back and forth, male-female interaction, I just thought was amazing. And as a listener and growing up in Maryland and seeing in DC in particular, people really resonate with that song, Baltimore too, when I would go to the clubs in either city, that just let me know that the 7 minutes of funk was showing no signs of slowing down and that people loved it and were still excited to hear it. And often, uh, get all these big artists involved in the song, and the fact that it just kept being used and used shows its staying power, shows its versatility, shows its funk. Well, so living up to the name, of course. And then you got Luxury Life with Busta Rhymes and Coi Leray coming out in 2023. So even recently, people are using the sample too. But as I was growing up and in the 90s, at different times in my life, as I talked about the original video, I, of course, went back as much as I could and as often as possible as time went on. And I started hearing and knowing and understanding that this 7 minutes of funk had been used in three of the examples that I remember in particular. Super Rapping by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five from 1979 was the first one that I remember, like, oh man, they used the same 7 minutes of funk there. That one, was probably the earliest of the songs that I really resonated, or earliest release of the songs that I knew of growing up that used it. And that one, of course, is the landmark, great song, phenomenal project. And it just shows too that, back in 79, one of the earliest rap records ever released, Super Rappin', that even back then they realized the potency of 7 minutes of funk, which, just shows you how powerful this beat is and how great it is, because the whole darn family 7 minutes of funk has been, used many, many, many times. Another example was the Sinister Two's Rocket Don't Stop It. And I remember this song is one of those songs, kind of like Super Rapping', where I think it's an excellent song. And I think because of a variety of factors, maybe it's not the signature song like in Grandmaster Flash's instance, or with Sinister 2, since they didn't really blow up and become a super big iconic group like Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5 did. Maybe Rocket Don't Stop It kind of gets lost, even though people have sampled it, people reference it on a regular basis, or they have throughout rap history. It by itself didn't become one of those songs that people reference or talk about when they're doing interviews or when they're making lists or stuff, even though I think, it deserves it. And Sinister 2 definitely did a great job on the song, and shout out to them for contributing that. And then the other notable instance I wanted to mention was Curtis Blow's Street Rock from his 1986 Kingdom Blow album. And this one, because Curtis Blow, despite being hugely influential, despite having all this tremendous success, often I think is right at that generation a little bit too early, even though he was in the mix of the explosion of rap in the late 70s, early 80s. As we get to the mid 1980s, there were so many new and innovative artists coming out that I think Curtis Blow, despite having gold records, despite being the first rapper signed to a major label with Mercury, despite working with the Fat Boys and enjoying tremendous success with them, and despite being on the radio out here in Los Angeles and all the things Curtis Blow's done, I don't think he gets enough shine or enough discussion for his contributions to the game, which is why when I do find things that are relevant to talk about him, I think it's important. And Street Rock is definitely an example of that, because 7 minutes of funk and Kingdom Blow definitely deserve the shine. So I know 7 minutes of funk has meant a lot to me as a rap fan, and then as just a music fan, and the whole darn family deserves as much credit as they can get for creating that phenomenal piece of music. And just to hear it used time and time again is something that I always get excited about. And I think the original composition is just so phenomenal that it doesn't matter how many times people have used it. It's so, I'd say, funky and raw and all these different things that it's never, at least to my opinion, been used in a way that I think diminishes or takes away from the great original recording that it is. And that's why I think all these different artists were able to present it so differently, and why for me it never felt old or stale, whether it was the Dane or the EPMD, as I'm listening to those songs in real time, and then the Alkaholiks, and then Dru Down, and then Jay-Z, all those artists used it. All those artists, I thought, made a brilliant song out of it and did it in a way that differentiated themselves from what the other rap artists had done before. And even with the Busta Rhymes more recently doing it, I enjoyed his song and it didn't take away, or I didn't feel like, oh man, he's just using the same beat. No, because the beat is so good and it had been a while and all these other things. And as we celebrate hip hop culture and as we, continue growing and developing with it, I do think it's important that we always do mention, when we could and should, the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Fives of the world, the Sinister Twos of the world, the Curtis Blows of the world, because they deserve our attention, deserve our respect, because they are foundational pieces from which this entire culture is built, and deserve our respect and our appreciation and our adoration, which is why I thought when Akil presented that idea that I thought it was valuable to not only revisit it, but to give a little different spin and talk about it in a little more detail as it traces my life as a rap fan, and then as a researcher going back and listening to some of these records that I missed when I was a kid. I wasn't even 10 or 11 years old when some of the records that I didn't hear in real time came out, but that's the beauty of time and studying and being able to go back and go over things. So anyway, there it is. If you have some comments, hit me up. Definitely Unique Access or myself will get back to you. And definitely there's so many other people who have used 7 Minutes of Funk, but those are some of my favorites and some of the ones I find most notable for the reasons I detailed. But there's others that you like, hit us up. Let's talk about it. And I'm Soren Baker. You can follow me on all social media at Soren Baker. And definitely, please subscribe. Please like this video. Please share it with a friend. Please get a friend to subscribe. And if you haven't already, please join Unique Access, become a member. Post a lot of our videos up early for our members, so that helps, and just helps the channel in general. So I appreciate your support. Soren Baker, catch you next time on the 1st and 15th.